Some of these stories do cover some sensitive topic matter, and viewer discretion is advised. And if you have a story you would like to send my way, go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so. And of course, thank you. I am 20 years old and female, and at the time of these events, I was around 12 to 13. So, I grew up in a very rural area. Like, my town was so small that it was legally considered a village. My house was one of 4 on a span of 40 acres. My childhood home, my grandparents' house right up the street, and my 2 neighbors. One of the neighbors, not the subject of this post, we're gonna call him T, had been living across near my family for as long as I can remember, and he rented out a trailer that he owned which was inhabited by the 4th neighbor, the subject of this post. We're gonna call him J. J and his girlfriend, who we're going to call A, had moved in a few months before these events, and I hadn't really met them. I knew of them, but I hadn't interacted with them directly. The day that I met J and A was extremely awkward, as I was a kid and I didn't really want to talk to them, but my grandma had made me go with her to drop off some vegetables that she had grown in her garden. When they came out after my grandma knocked on the trailer door, I was first struck by how they looked. I know that sounds bad, but I'm not judging. I now know that both of them were addicted to meth. My grandma started the conversation, and I tried to be polite, as I was raised to be, by introducing myself when told to do so. I wasn't really able to finish my sentence, as I noticed Jay was staring at me very intently. He looked like he was either mad or hungry or both. Not the creepiest stuff off the bat, as they both seemed polite enough, and I brushed off the stare as him just trying to be polite, looking at me as I spoke to him as most people do. The creepy part is that as time went on, he began to try and be near me more and more. He would ride his bike past our house over and over for what seemed like hours, while me and my brother played catch in the yard, with baseball gloves and a softball. Then he began to go to church with me and my brother and my grandparents. He would make sure to sit right next to me in the back seat of the car as he rode with us. If my brother tried to sit in the middle, so I wasn't right next to Jay, he would throw a fit about how my brother was squishing him against the door. Then, he started coming to my grandma's house when she would have me and my brother after school, offering to tutor me with various subjects. What really scared me was that I'd begun seeing him walk near our house at night, trying to shine a flashlight into my window. He tried various things to get close to me. Tried to convince my parents to let him teach me how to golf. Tried to help me practice my catching positions for softball. He tried to get me to go with him and A to the movies, and none of these things ever included my brother. Only me. Things finally came to a head when I was playing with my dog outside in our front yard. She was a boxer, and he started repeatedly doing laps on his bike down the road again, staring at me, like he did the day we met. I was extremely uncomfortable. I've always had very good intuition about people, and something was always just off with him. But that day, I was terrified. He parked his bike right in the middle of the road and got off. He then started walking towards me at almost a jog, and I just kept backing away. What happened next is why I believe that dogs are a better judge of character than people could ever hope to be. My boxer ran up at him, and she launched herself onto him when he was about 6 feet from me. She tore into his arm, and I saw blood. I screamed and my mom ran outside shortly after. She was trying to pull my dog off of him, but as soon as she was able to, holding on to the dog collar, she started yelling at him, asking him why he was in our yard with me alone. He couldn't answer her, and just started running back to his bike, riding back to the trailer. My grandma ended up driving him to the hospital, as J and A didn't have a car, and I later learned that he got 16 stitches. He never gave a reason as to why he was approaching me, and they moved out shortly after. I haven't seen him since, and I'm still terrified to this day that I'll run into him again. I'm not sure if this is creepy enough to share, but I can't stop thinking about it. Maybe I'm just overthinking it. Earlier, I was on my way to work and stopped into a nearby gas station to grab a drink and a snack. As I'm approaching the drink area, there's a normal-looking guy, and by normal-looking, I mean that, from my perspective, there was nothing off-putting about him. He looked like a nice person. He was just standing there. I see that it is visibly a tight space between him and the fridge doors, so I say excuse me, so that I could politely walk by towards the water that I was eyeing up. As I go past him, he says, "What do you think this is?" As someone who has a sense of humor, I thought he was just joking or giving me a hard time, so I just laughed and proceeded to grab the water. I then see him staring at me out of my peripheral visions, so I looked over and he's giving me a blank, menacing stare. The smile was wiped off my face very quickly, and I said, "What?" out of confusion. He then continues to stare at me and just says, "Yeah," almost as if he was implying that he was telling me off or making a point or something. I just tried to ignore it and proceeded to grab a snack. As he approaches the register to check out, I overhear him say to the cashier, "I feel like people are following me today." To which the cashier responds, "Who?" And he then repeats, "I feel like people are following me." I then get in line behind him, and he very much intentionally drops his license, debit card, and some other cards. They dropped behind him towards me, and he then turns around and just looks at me. He looks down at the cards and then back up at me. He slowly bent down to pick them up while staring at me and then proceeded to leave the gas station while looking at me. I have no idea what I just experienced, but it was very unsettling. I didn't say anything negative to him, nor was I rude in any manner when trying to move by him in the gas station. I did not follow him whatsoever, nor did I give him any reason to drop his personal cards behind him towards me. So, I'm continuing to ask myself, why did this man act this way? And why did I feel such a menacing energy during my entire time in there? I don't expect anyone to give me specific reasoning as to what I experienced. I just really needed to share what happened. When my dad first told me this story as a kid, it gave me chills. And since I stumbled upon this sub, I might as well share. I still remember every detail. Before going into the details, I'll give some context to set the setting and background of the incident. Bear with me. They totally add up to the scary elements of the story. Back in 1985, my 19-year-old dad was serving in the Greek Army Special Forces, in the Paratrooper Division. It's kind of irrelevant, but I'm a proud son, so I thought I'd mention it. Army service in Greece is mandatory for every male that has reached their 18th birthday, and so everyone has to go. Military camp, where each company is stationed at, are mostly positioned in the countryside, and usually there isn't much going on near and around the camps. They're fairly secluded. The closest town to my pop's camp was about 3 kilometers away. One night, while serving, it was my dad's turn to go on guard duty in the camp that he was posted in. Every night, 5 to 6 of the soldiers were selected for guard duty, and they slept in the same barracks. Half an hour before it was time for the previous guards to be relieved, another soldier would come in the room, wake up the new batch so they would get ready to go to their positions. Each shift was 2 hours. The 12 to 6 a.m. shifts were the worst, according to my pops. It gets extremely cold in the winter, and you're half asleep, standing beside your booth, freezing your butt off while keeping watch. The only way to be vigilant and keep warm is if you take a few steps up and down. So, it was 2 a.m., and my dad was standing there next to his booth with his M1 Garand rifle. The Greek army used World War II weapons in the 80s, yes. Absolute silence. He could only hear the wind. He mentioned that the moon was helpful with visibility, but there's only so much you can make out at night, even with the moon apart from dark shadows, especially at longer distances. There were some tree lines far away, but there wasn't much vegetation around the camp at all. It was more like a clearing. Everything was going well, just like every other night, until a tall, dark mass appears from the path, coming out of a tree line, and it's headed right towards my father's booth. My dad's heart starts pumping when he spots it, and he said that he is scared witless at this point. The mass is moving slow but steady, and is closing the distance. It's almost like it's floating with big, slow steps. My dad does what he is instructed to do, and what every guard does in a situation like this. He raises his rifle, aims, and screams, "Halt! Identify yourself!" No reply. The shadow continues to approach. Second time, "Halt! Identify yourself!" Nothing. He told me that at this point he is certain that he's seeing a ghost in real life. He says he thought to himself, "Alright, let's see if a ghost can die." Before he engages, he has to scream a code word that raises the alarm. The way that works is, the next guard on the next booth that is hundreds of meters away will hear the scream and then scream himself. And with a chain reaction like that, the alarm goes from booth to booth and reaches the patrol. The patrol is an office with 5 soldiers that makes the rounds between booths every night and make sure everything is okay with the guards. If you're caught sleeping or away from your post by these guys, well, rest in peace. They're also the ones to investigate the alarms. The only problem is, the patrol might take a while to get to the booth that raised the alarm, as they don't know which one it is, and they might be far from the correct one. They run double time, through every booth and until they locate the original source of the alarm. My dad hears the other guys screaming and he knows the alarm is raised. He knows that the patrol is going to be there in a few minutes. He also knows that the penalty for falsely raising the alarm is prison. Prison means a soldier gets X amount of days added to their service. The service back then was 2 years plus prison days that have been added to a soldier along the way from penalties. They don't actually lock you up in a cell unless you commit an actual crime, and then the military police comes in. But he doesn't have minutes. This eerie figure is 50 meters away and closing in. He gets ready to fire. Then he hears, "Relax," my dad's name. It's me. Another soldier covered in a black blanket that my dad knew was trying to sneak back into the camp at night, after having fun in the nearest town without permission. He was holding a bottle of liquor too, and was fairly drunk. My dad let him through, but he knew that he was about to get a serious amount of prison time for falsely raising the alarm once the patrol figured out it was his booth that the alarm was raised from. The patrol gets there, and my dad doesn't snitch on the drunk guy. The officer tells him that they'll see each other the next morning. Next day in line, where the penalties are being announced by the officers, my dad is waiting to hear his name called. But they never mention him. Even though an alarm raise is extremely rare to happen, nobody tells him anything. Turns out, the patrol officer and the ghost, quote-unquote, were buddies. The guy sneaking in told the lieutenant what happened, and to not mention my dad. The officer apparently pulled some strings, and the whole incident was like it never even happened. So, it was a happy ending after all. Hope you enjoyed. I want to tell this story to warn others. I, 18 female, live in Maryland, USA. I work at a very popular burger restaurant, and I work at the payment window, which is where I stand all night. I'm very friendly. I know sometimes a smile and a compliment can make someone's day a little better. Just this night, before the creeper came, I had a customer tell me that I was so freaking happy and she loved me for it. And that gave me the courage and energy to survive this next interaction. I'm used to the awkward comments and stares from old men. I'm sure it's my friendliness that attracts them. Our uniforms are not revealing. They think that I'm naive, and maybe I am. A lot more than I thought. I'm fully aware of the dangers of trafficking. This particular old man came through just before 6. He pretended to not hear his order, and then laughed like it was a joke between two friends. This is not uncommon. It's an old man thing. No red flags yet. I tell him his total and he hands me all but the change. When he does this, he waves the money around, making me chase it. I was able to snatch the cash, but again, it was just an old man thing, so not concerned yet. He stared at the company name on my shirt and asked if that was my name. I don't wear a name tag for this reason. I joked that I was going to change my name permanently to that, and he perked up. At this point, I should state that he was white, mid-60s to 70s, driving a small white SUV with a kayak on top. He had some scruff on his face, and he was holding a phone to his ear the entire time. When I finally began to engage with him, he moved the phone to be facing me. Looking back, I believe he was recording me. At no point did he speak into the phone nor acknowledge it in any way. He started to probe with more pressing questions. Here's the thing. I have the same last name as someone from US history. Most old people like talking about that stuff, so I told him my last name. He didn't reflect or laugh. He just accepted and continued asking questions. And that's when I started to get that sinking feeling. He still owed me change, I told him. He grabbed another $1 and handed it to me, but he wouldn't let it go. He wanted to know my first name, and I dodged answering because I was getting creeped out. He would not let go of the money and was practically drooling for more information about me. I gave him a name that I don't use, and he smiled, finally letting go. I got him his change, and I told him to have a nice day. I then immediately left the window and told one of my coworkers about the weird experience. He returned just 2 hours later. I didn't recognize his car on the cameras until he got to my window. I hadn't thought too much about our interaction and was busy texting my dad about whether or not a chicken sandwich was a burger. My stomach dropped when I saw his face. I have many regulars, all of whom I would be happy to see. and I hope he doesn't become one. I'll call the police if so." He smiled and said, "Hey, the one with the last name." I half smiled back and wished for the days when we all wore masks. I tell him his total, and he makes me chase the money again. For the entire time, he had his phone against his ear, facing me. He starts asking even more intimate questions about me. I lie or dodge them the best that I can, giving him 0 correct answers, wanting our interaction to be as short as possible. Some of the questions he asked me: "How often do you work? What time do you leave? Oh, and how old are you?" For that one, I knew that he would not leave without a number, and I had a nasty feeling the younger wouldn't be better. So I said, "Probably in my 20s. He then joked about me being legal. I made a face and tried to get his change even faster. He then asked if I had a boyfriend. I was getting more and more nervous, so my answers started getting more sarcastic. I told him that boys were trouble. He specifically talked about himself, and then said that he would treat me right. I handed him his receipt and told him to have a great night. He threw his hands in the air and was saying, "Don't be like that, I'll treat you right." I shut my window and said bye. He made a bit more of a fuss, but eventually drove forward. From his questions about when I got off work, I believe he was watching the restaurant. I was shaking by this time and I called my mom. She immediately drove up. I talked to the manager and I was a little unsure of the car's colors, so he checked the camera for me. Shout out to my manager, he's the best. I continued at my window and watched for the old guy, but I didn't see him again. I then left an hour early and gave my manager specific instructions to not place a girl at my window. And he agreed. These interactions are, unfortunately, what cause formerly happy and cheerful service workers to become sour and quiet. I think I'll be taking a couple of days off. I already had another job lined up, and I'm excited to start it. And thank you for reading." The OP then added 2 edits. The first one being in regards to the fact that their story had a title stating they believed they were almost trafficked at work. Edit 1. I did not mean to make light of trafficking victims with my story. I did feel trapped by this guy, and felt fear that he would be waiting for me, no matter when he thought I got off shift. I do not have a car, and I take myself home on a bike after dark. I think that I would have been very easy to follow and trap, but I did not tell him how I get home. Edit 2. People seem to be confused, and I guess I didn't elaborate enough on his phone. He held it facing me for the extent of both of our interactions. Roughly 5 to 8 minutes, he wouldn't leave. He never moved it or lowered it. I have 2 guesses. He was recording me and could be preparing to use that video or send it to someone, or he was on a call with someone listening in who I can't identify. Trafficking was not my first thought. I'm more concerned about how easy I would be to kidnap at night on a dark suburban road. And yes, after kidnapping, any number of things could happen to me. Just because I have a job and people assume my father lives in state doesn't mean I shouldn't feel threatened. That's the reason that I left so quickly, by car, with a trusted adult who picked me up. And the reason I made this post was to warn others in my area. And that's why I gave a description of him and his car. Some backstory. I, female, was 13 at the time, but I looked more like I was 10. My grandma lived 2 states away and discovered that she had stage 4 cancer. My mom packed me and my sisters up and drove us there while my dad stayed home for work. We were there for 3 months. My aunts and uncle lived in the same city as my grandma, and me and my sisters would frequently spend the night at one of my aunt's houses. One day, I was making lunch for my grandma when my uncle walked into the kitchen. He suddenly shouted and rushed out the back door. I caught a glimpse of a man in a red baseball hat running from the kitchen window. He'd been watching me. My uncle claimed that he didn't catch him. We then found 2 piles of cigarette butts in my backyard, one by the kitchen window and one by the bathroom window. Yeah, my grandma didn't have blinds or curtains on any of her windows besides her bedroom window. Needless to say, we were horrified. Fast forward a few days, and my mom was certain who the peeping Tom was. My grandma's neighbor, who always wore a red baseball hat and had suddenly become smoking buddies with my uncle. We couldn't prove anything because my uncle backed him up, and we didn't want my grandma to be distressed, so we let it go. A couple days later, I was spending the night at one of my aunt's houses while my sisters were at another aunt's. It was just my cousin and I there while my aunt was at the store. I heard a car door, and I peeked out the window to see if it was my aunt. But I saw a man standing at the end of the empty driveway. He was wearing a red baseball hat, pulled over his eyes. My uncle had told him where I was. I freaked out. I locked the doors and I told my cousin to call her mom. She was on her way home, but the man was already gone. After that, I never left my mom's side. I stayed every night at my grandma's house. My dad flew up soon after, and that was the end of the incidents with my grandma's neighbor, because there was now a man in the house. And if my dad left for the store or something, he took me with him. It's been 14 years, and many disturbing things have come to light. My uncle is a predator, and one of my sisters was one of his victims. My aunts knew, and they covered for him. That sister of mine, she's running the streets, using hard substances to self-medicate, and her son was taken away from her. My parents are absolutely devastated, and the guilt eats away at my mom every day. I'm a 22-year-old Brazilian male from a really small town, and in 2018, I moved to the capital of my state for study and work. In these 5 years, I never had any sight of any creepy encounters or even a robbery. But last Friday, I had the worst experience of my life. At the start of 2020, I moved to this apartment complex. I live on the first floor of the first block, which makes the space behind my bedroom window a common area. And in these 3 years, same thing. All peace, no robbery around. Not many people walking behind the place looking inside, except some internet provider technicians, and a trustful neighbor who eventually walks behind to make it to his bike faster at the start of the day. People tend to ignore us living inside. They would pass by just minding their own business, talking to me only if I was in a different area of the apartment, like the little porch in our living room. I currently live with 2 friends from my old town and my girlfriend. Last Friday, one of those friends went back to our town, leaving me, my girlfriend, and the other friend alone in the apartment. Around 3 a.m., me and my girlfriend came home from a bar we like to go to every Friday. At this point, it was all normal. We got home, ate something, took a shower, and rolled a blunt, like normal couples do. In that time, my friend came home around 3:30 a.m., making the situation even more secure for us. As usual, we invited him to smoke with us, which he denies, because he was tired. So we decided to just smoke and go to my bedroom to have some alone time. during the deed, we hear some strange noises but end up continuing. In some moments, we want to change things up, and we again hear the noise of something sliding. So I looked at the windows, and I saw a guy's face practically glued to the window's bars, watching us. I have a very short temper, which leads me into berserk mode, instantly breaking the window glass with my bare hands. I was really ticked off, and I ran to the kitchen to get a cutting knife while repeatedly screaming, "I'm gonna kill you." When my adrenaline subsided, I managed to calm down and called my mom to say that I was going to stay at her house for a few days, in my old town. We're very scared and suspicious of our neighbor upstairs, as we saw him in the same place earlier, and I could recognize scars from freckles on both the window's face and the face from earlier. However, without confirmation, we are left in an extremely uncomfortable position, not knowing exactly who the person is, and him knowing exactly who we are. He knew we were going to be late, he knew where we lived, etc. Some info about the dude. The guy we suspect was seen in the same spot earlier picking up weed ends. He looked into the apartment, and he chuckled. He's my neighbor upstairs. He doesn't work, doesn't study. He just listens to music all day and does drugs. As I have insomnia, I can oftentimes hear him arranging lines of cocaine and then snorting it. And I hate the way that stuff makes me feel. So, this event happened when I was 16. I'm currently 18, but our home had to have some renovations, so the builders told us the renovations would only take about a month. We were able to live in an Airbnb that is, thankfully, in the same neighborhood as us. I take the bus to and from school, and it's a very long walk to the bus stop from this new location. One thing about me is that I have a very poor sense of direction. Even if I've been taking the same road for years, it's still a possibility that I will forget the way. So, I was lost walking home one day and accidentally found another route on the way to the Airbnb from the bus stop, which added another 10 minutes to an about 20-minute walk. This is important context to the story. So, one day, I'm walking home from the bus stop, and I'm cursing myself out because it's minus 20-something, and I've accidentally taken the longer route, which is when I first noticed a middle-aged man a good distance behind me. At first, I just shrugged it off, because he wasn't very close at all, but I did begin to get concerned, because the route that I'm taking is not a regular one. It's one where you have to cut between houses, etc. And it seemed too large of a coincidence. He was constantly behind me, even on the absurd route that I'm taking. At this point, I'm scared, but I don't want to alert him because it's winter and it's already getting dark out, and I'm not strong at all, so my chances of overpowering a grown man are slim to none. I pick up my pace, increasing the already pretty large distance between us. So, as soon as I round the corner, there's a fence surrounding the Airbnb, and there's a gate that breaks up that fence, that leads you into the neighborhood and where the house is. This is technically the back way, and you're not supposed to cross the gate. He hasn't rounded the corner yet, he was pretty far behind me, so at this point I sprint like my life depends on it down the sidewalk, and duck under the gate and hide behind the fence. I then climb the porch stairs and peek across the fence. It's a position where I can see the road and sidewalk, but they can't see me. And he bursts from around the fence running, probably because the distance between us had grown too large, and then stops in his tracks when he doesn't see me. He then pulls out his phone and starts talking and then goes back the way he came. Until this day, I'm not sure if this was paranoia or if he genuinely had bad intentions. But I'm still glad that there was such a distance between us, which is the only way I was able to run off, unnoticed by him. So that, my friends, was a collection of stranger and stalker stories. I put that on the thumbnail this time. Let's see if it makes a difference. Probably won't. I don't even know anymore. I don't know what text to put on thumbnails. I'm trying my best to figure out what to say with these stories, these videos, I guess would be appropriate too. Because they're not all stalker stories, but they're not all stranger stories, because sometimes the strangers are strangers. Let me phrase that. Sometimes the stalkers are people you know, like neighbors or family members in this case too. So, hard to determine that. Anyways, these stories were absolutely terrifying, and I want to say thank you to everyone who allowed me to read their story. I know a lot of these can be sensitive to the people who put them out there, so yeah. Thank you, again, to everyone who sent me their story or let me read their story. I do appreciate it. And I also appreciate you, friend, for listening to this point. You're at the end of the video, and you could easily just click off right now. You could easily close this video or hit the next button and go to another one. But you haven't yet, so you're awesome. Yeah. If you enjoyed this video, please do hit that thumbs up button. That'd be helpful. I'd appreciate it. You can also subscribe to the channel if you're brand new and haven't done so yet. You can also, let's see, comment. That's what I'm looking for. You can also leave me a comment down below the video letting me know your thoughts on the video, your thoughts on me, your thoughts on cabbage, anything you choose, really. Yeah. There's also super thanks, which is a tip to the channel. Never expected, always appreciated. And the Patreon and membership, where you get early access to content like this, so long as it goes up early, and other things depending on what you sign up for and how you sign up. All that said, my friends, I hope you remember you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you are the best you that you can be. Do not forget it, and don't let anyone ever tell you otherwise. Just don't. Don't let them. Yeah. And of course, until next time, much love, and sleep well.